Highly pathogenic avian influenza has been a topic on the minds of bird owners, from the major operations to backyard flock owners, for a couple of years now. So what's the latest on bird flu, and what does the farming community need to be mindful of? Joining us on the PNW Ag Network hotline is Dr. Amber Itle, the Washington State veterinarian. And Dr. Itle, thank you so much for the time. So what's the latest when it comes to HPAI?
Since February of 2022, we've had avian influenza detections in 1,171 poultry premises in 48 states in the last 2 years. Interestingly, this outbreak has changed because avian influenza has now spilled over, not just into those wild carnivorous mammals, because we've seen that for the last 2 years, but now we've seen this single spillover event into dairy cattle. And we really think that happened through one introduction from wild birds into a dairy herd in Texas. And since then, since about March of this year, we've had 194 premises in 13 states that have been confirmed with the diagnosis of highly pathogenic avian influenza, or the H5N1 virus, that's circulating in dairy cattle. So the emphasis around our response has kind of shifted a little bit. We are seeing a lull in the detections in commercial and backyard poultry, but we expect that right now in the summer. We would anticipate, though, that we will continue to see these detections as birds migrate for the winter. So as birds come back from Alaska and they migrate south for the winter, we usually see a resurgence of this virus in our backyard and commercial flocks. So we have a couple different outbreaks going on right now. And usually what happens with avian influenza viruses is, in the summer months, the birds go up to Alaska and they hang out with a bunch of birds from all over the world, and they go on dates and they change viruses, and those viruses reassort. And then they come back down in the wintertime, and we just kind of always hold our breath and cross our fingers and hope that the virus has changed enough that it goes from this highly pathogenic strain that we've been seeing, which means it kills a lot of birds, it makes a lot of birds sick, to a low pathogenic strain, which means, hey, birds might get a little bit sick, but they don't die, right? So this is normal for these influenza viruses to circulate, but what's not normal is for this particularly highly pathogenic virus to persist for 2 years and then maybe coming into its third year. It's also been a very awkward thing to have the virus change just enough that it's been able to adapt to spill over into dairy cattle. Very odd, and it seems to have this affinity for the udder of the dairy cow, so we're seeing the virus come through in the milk. I think, this is a really complex issue, and you and I could talk about this for an hour, depending on what you would want to understand about avian influenza viruses. But what I will say is that we are very good at response. We have been able to eradicate HPAI from our domestic flocks here. What we're trying to focus on now is really trying to eradicate HPAI from this very odd spillover event into dairy cattle. So, it sounds like a lot, 194 detections, but we have about 30,000 dairy herds in the United States. What we're trying to do is get this thing contained and eradicated before it becomes an endemic disease of dairy cattle. So it's a very complex question, like what's going on with HPAI. There's a lot going on, and yet there's not a lot going on. So it's something we're going to have to continue to lean in on and try to figure out if we can maintain this kind of eradication strategy that we've been using with poultry. Can we use a similar strategy with dairy cattle? Because this is really a poultry disease that's accidentally showing up in cows. So there's a lot of concerns now, from the kind of One Health community, from CDC, from the Office of Pandemic Preparedness, and from some of our other partners, even at the White House level, that are really concerned about whether this could be the start of the next global pandemic. Certainly after COVID-19, I think we all have a little post-traumatic stress disorder from that. And it's certainly something of concern. I mean, I don't think we should panic, but it is something we need to pay attention to, right? That we need to make sure we're staying on top of. This has been quite the crazy and evolving situation. No one ever 2 years ago or even last year could have predicted that something like this would have happened. So definitely kind of a strange change of events with regards of HPAI. But here in Washington State, we have had no detections of HPAI in poultry, either backyard or commercial, since December of 2023, and we've had no detections of HPAI in dairy cattle, and it's something that we are paying very close attention to. We feel very confident that at this point in time, we don't have the virus here in Washington. So that's a good thing, but we're continuing to closely monitor and be prepared for response.
Dr. Itle, along those lines, in the past when you and I have talked, we've discussed ways that poultry owners, whether it's a commercial production or just somebody who has backyard birds, what they can do to keep their birds safe. Can you remind us what to do to keep birds safe? And also maybe let's bring in our friends from the dairy. What can they do to keep their animals safe from highly pathogenic avian influenza?
Yeah, those are great questions. I love that. So, as a reminder, and people have been hearing this for a long time and nothing's really changed, but we really just want to think about good biosecurity. What does that mean? Well, good biosecurity means, number one, is keeping your animals away from the source of infection. So if I'm a backyard flock, the most important thing you can do is keep your birds away from wild waterfowl. We are continuing to see detections of HPAI in waterfowl in Washington state. That's continuing to happen. We are continuing to see birds of prey that are consuming those ducks or other waterfowl that are infected die. So I just saw today an owl came through that was positive and died. So the most important thing that backyard flock owners can do is keep their birds separate from wild birds. So if you have a pond, try to keep your birds away, your domestic ducks away from wild ducks. If you have chickens, don't mix species. Don't mix your ducks and your geese with your chickens. That definitely increases the risk. You also want to make sure you're putting your feed away so you're not attracting wild waterfowl into your premise, into your chicken coops, into your pastures or your yards, because if they come down and land and they contaminate the environment there, that does put you at higher risk of infection. So those are kind of the most important things you can do. The one factor we've seen in almost every single case we've had in Washington state, I think we've had about 45 backyard flocks, almost all of them had direct contact with wild waterfowl. So that's the most important. For dairy cattle, the most important thing we can do is not import lactating dairy animals from states that have had infections of HPAI in dairy. That is the number one most common way that it's being transmitted, is cow-to-cow transmission through an infected animal. We do know there's other potential mechanisms of spread through vehicles, through common shared workers, but we definitely want to be cognizant of that. I think one of the things we also want to bring up with people is just to understand that there is risk for any carnivorous mammals, including cats and dogs that ingest infected birds. So keeping your cats and dogs away from, dead birds, waterfowl, that sort of thing is important, because we know that especially on these dairies, we've seen more cats show up dead that are either ingesting milk or ingesting rodents that are infected with this virus. So we want to be able to protect our companion animals. But I do want to make sure everyone knows that we are working closely with both our poultry and dairy sectors on the commercial level. We actually had our first ever cross-sector meeting where we're starting to share ideas and have some accountability to each other, like, hey, what are you guys doing to keep it out? What are you doing to keep it out? And we're trying to work together to come up with the best biosecurity practices, because we are all one agricultural community here in Washington, and we do want to support each other. And I was really excited to see this, just this huge forward-leaning effort, and people were really all in and wanting to understand each other's industries and understanding that we're all doing the same thing. We're all trying to protect the economic viability of our industries, and we're all trying to produce a safe food product that we can maintain disease freedom so that we can allow for international trade and commerce between states. And that really does protect the economic viability of all of our industries and our state and all the people who work within those industries, and for the consumers here in Washington state so they have a safe, wholesome product that they can consume. So we're all in this together. And I appreciate that everybody, whether you're a backyard flock, whether you have fair animals, whether you're doing exhibitions, whether you have a commercial flock, whether you raise, beef cattle, whatever you're doing, whatever you're contributing to the agricultural sector, that we are all in this together. And so anything you can do to help prevent those kinds of disease introductions is important. And, that kind of circles back to all the things that we need to do to care for our animals this winter. We're all in this together. We all want to care for our animals. We all want to make sure we have a safe, healthy product for our consumer. And I'm just so grateful for for the amazing producers that we have in our state that really do the best job that they can and are always looking for how they can do things better. So really appreciate all the efforts out there all the way around. We just have a great community to work with.
Dr. Amber Itle, Washington State veterinarian, thanks so much for joining us right here on the PNW Ag Network.